Each time the killer murders a wax figure, a real person dies in exactly the same way. Every step is part of a flawlessly planned crime, but no matter how perfect a murder seems, it always leaves behind a clue, and when the truth finally comes to light, everyone is left in shock. One day, Hajime and Miyuki are dragged by Inspector Isamu to take part in a mystery competition called Mystery Night. As they talk, Miyuki spots the venue in the distance, a castle surrounded by towering mountains. Isamu explains that the place is called Balt Castle. Although the name sounds elegant, the locals know it as the Castle of Wax Spirits. The entire castle was relocated from Germany, but the developer went bankrupt before the project was completed, leaving it abandoned for years. Hearing this, Miyuki becomes excited because she remembers reading in the event brochure that the grand prize is ownership of the castle itself. The moment Hajime hears that the castle is the prize, he immediately rushes inside. However, as soon as he enters, he accidentally bumps into a girl named Maria and quickly apologizes. The three of them push open the castle gates and discover countless wax figures displayed throughout the halls. They arrive at a large reception room. When they open the door, they find several contestants already waiting inside. They are mystery novelist Kahoru, book critic Bando, detective agency president Toma, reporter McKeem, criminal psychologist Richard, and Edward, who introduces himself as the nephew of a police detective. After introducing themselves, everyone begins discussing the first challenge of the competition. They discover a note attached to a locked door with a strange word that nobody recognizes. Hajime understands the answer at a glance, but before he can speak, someone else solves it first. The newcomer is Officer Kengo. He explains that if the note is turned upside down, it actually reads moon. After saying that, Kengo walks over to a nearby wax figure and flips the moon sign it is holding. The locked door slowly swings open. Out of the darkness steps a man named Shunzo, the castle's butler. Shunzo then leads everyone to the Room of Red Room, the mysterious organizer of the competition. But when they open the door, the room is completely empty except for several wax figures that look exactly like each of them. As everyone stands there confused, a hoarse voice echoes through the castle. Red Rum announces that Mystery Night has officially begun. The moment he finishes speaking, the drawbridge rises and the castle gates seal shut. Shunzo calmly explains that this is to help everyone focus on solving the mysteries. Before anyone can object, he extends his hand and asks everyone to surrender their phones. Although they think the request is excessive, the enormous prize convinces them to cooperate. Shunzo assigns the contestants to rooms in the East Tower and West Tower. Before leaving, he reminds everyone that dinner starts at 7 o'clock and that they must wear the clothes prepared in their rooms. Hajime soon enters his room and discovers that it resembles a prison cell more than a guest room. While complaining about it, he notices a note lying on the desk. At 7 that evening, everyone gathers once again. Only then do they realize that the clothes they are wearing are identical to those worn by their own wax figures. As everyone wonders whether this is another clue, Hajime notices that Maria bears an uncanny resemblance to the woman in a painting hanging in the dining hall. Later that night, everyone returns to their rooms, but Hajime is too restless to sleep and goes to find Miyuki. Hoping to explore the castle, without waiting for her agreement, he drags her through the dark corridors. Before long, they discover an entrance leading to the basement. Miyuki remembers that the underground area is supposed to be the castle's recreation room. Hajime suddenly jumps out and scares her. Startled, Miyuki runs downstairs. A second later, a terrified scream echoes through the castle. The scream draws everyone to the basement. When they enter the recreation room, they find Toma collapsed face down on a pool table with a knife buried in her back. Strangely, nobody panics, because the victim is not a real person, but a wax figure made to look exactly like Toma. While everyone is still trying to figure out who staged the prank, Redrum's voice echoes through the room again. He instructs them to investigate the scene and identify the killer. Only then does everyone realize that this is the first case of the mystery competition. They immediately begin searching for clues. Before long, someone notices that beneath the wax figure's right hand are two billiard balls, the number 9 and the number 3. Based on their colors, Richard concludes that the killer must be wearing either yellow or green, but Hajime disagrees. He points out that the killer would certainly have bloodstains on their clothes, so anyone dressed in yellow or green would have changed before returning to the group. Instead, he believes the key lies in the numbers themselves. Among everyone present, only Bando's name can be connected to those numbers through Japanese wordplay. Kengo suddenly laughs and points out a fatal flaw in Hajime's deduction. Drawing on his experience as a police officer, he explains that someone stabbed in the back would die instantly and would never have the strength to grab billiard balls. That means the balls must have been placed there afterward to frame Bando. Kengo adds that a real number 9 ball always has a small underline beneath the number. The ball in the wax figure's hand has no such mark. In other words, it is actually a number 6 ball turned upside down. This proves that the killer doesn't understand billiards. Among everyone present, the only person unfamiliar with the game is Hajime. After dinner, Kengo had invited everyone to play pool, and Hajime refused because he didn't know how. Faced with Kengo's reasoning, Hajime calmly admits that he is the killer. He then explains that everything he did was according to the instructions inside the envelope he received. He deliberately staged a fake murder as part of the competition. The explanation leaves everyone furious. They complain that such a simple case is an insult to their intelligence, but Redrum's voice echoes through the castle once again. He tells them that what they just experienced was merely an appetizer. The real case is only beginning now. Only then does everyone realize that the real Toma has never appeared. At first they assume she is hiding in her room, but when they force open her door, every single person freezes in horror. The real Toma is lying in a pool of blood with a knife buried in her back, and just like the wax figure, she is clutching 2 billiard balls in her hand. The discovery of a real murder finally makes Kengo realize how serious the situation has become. He immediately demands that Shunzo stop the competition and bring Redrum out. Shunzo looks troubled and explains that Redrum is not even inside the castle. All of the announcements have been pre-recorded. With no other choice, Kengo tells Shunzo to call the police, but Shunzo reveals that everyone's phones have mysteriously disappeared. Kengo decides to drive out and report the crime himself. However, when he reaches the castle entrance, he discovers that the mechanism controlling the drawbridge has been sabotaged. Their missing phones have also been destroyed. With the only exit cut off, everyone is trapped inside the castle. They spend the next 2.5 hours searching for another way out, but despite searching every corner, they find nothing. Although no exit exists, Hajime becomes certain that Toma's killer is still among them. Edward suddenly realizes that if you spell Redrum backward, it becomes murder. When Hajime remembers that the competition is scheduled to last another 4 days, an uneasy feeling creeps over him. He begins to fear that more people are going to die. That night, Kengo returns to his room and flips through some childhood photographs. Beneath them is another picture featuring Toma, Richard, and several others. The moment he sees it, his expression changes completely. At the same time, Hajime continues thinking about the case. He becomes convinced that the key to solving everything is hidden within the wax figures themselves. Early the next morning, everyone staying in the East Tower is awakened by Redrum's voice. He announces that the second performance is about to begin in the West Tower. Everyone rushes over, only to find the reception room door locked shut. Kengo kicks the door open. Inside lies a wax figure of Richard. The sight immediately makes Kengo realize that the next victim is probably Richard himself. The group races to Richard's room. When they force the door open, they find Richard is dead. His body is posed in exactly the same way as the wax figure. The horrifying scene causes Miyuki to scream, and her cry quickly draws everyone else over. To investigate the case, the group gathers once again in the West Tower reception room. Hajime studies Richard's wax figure for a long time. He notices that although the wooden stake appears to pierce the body, its front end is actually flat. He also discovers that only the head is made of wax while the rest of the figure is constructed from foam. Combining these observations, Hajime concludes that the killer must have had a reason for not driving the stake into the wax body. Kengo suggests confronting Redrum directly. Hajime assumes that Kengo knows who Redrum really is, but Kengo denies it. Even so, he says he already has a rough idea who killed Richard. The reception room in the West Tower had been locked from the inside. The entire tower functioned as one giant locked room. Therefore, the killer is most likely one of the other 3 people staying in the West Tower. The 3 suspects immediately deny the accusation. Hajime also believes Kengo's evidence is far from convincing, but Kengo argues that overcomplicating a case is the biggest mistake any detective can make. As the two continue arguing, Kaoru calmly speaks up. She says that if they truly want to find the killer, the most important task is solving the mystery of the locked room murder in the West Tower. Yet no matter how hard he thinks, Hajime still cannot figure out the trick. Unable to sleep, he decides to search for more clues himself. The moment he steps outside, Redrum's voice echoes through the castle once again. He announces that the third case has already begun in the fireplace room. Hajime immediately rushes there and throws open the door. A wave of scorching heat hits him in the face. Inside, he sees a wax figure of Kengo with its head severed from its body. Realizing something is terribly wrong, Hajime sprints toward Kengo's room. No matter how hard he knocks, there is no response from inside. He sends Miyuki to find Shunzo and retrieve the spare key, but Shunzo searches everywhere and cannot find it. With no other option, Hajime grabs an axe. Together with Shunzo, he smashes the door open. Hajime hurriedly woke Kengo up, and when he came to, he immediately felt a splitting headache. Maria notices white powder residue on the bottom of the kettle sitting on the table. She concludes that Kengo was most likely drugged with sleeping pills. Just then, Makim suddenly realizes that Bando is nowhere to be seen. Everyone rushes back to the fireplace room. There they discover that the wax figure representing Bando has disappeared. But Hajime clearly remembers seeing it only moments earlier. He immediately runs to Bando's room. The moment he pushes open the door, he freezes. A wax figure of Bando is hanging from the ceiling. Beside it hangs the real Bando, dead by hanging. Kengo notices a remote control resting on the table. When he presses the button, Drum's recorded voice fills the room. The recording declares that the hanged Bando is Red Rum himself and that Mystery Night has officially come to an end. But Hajime still felt something was off. If Bando really was Red Rum, why wouldn't he use his own voice? He began to suspect that the true killer was still among the remaining participants. Everyone returned to the fireplace room. Hajime stared at the fireplace for a long time, the events replaying again and again in his mind. Then, suddenly, everything clicked. He went alone to Toma's room, his gaze locking onto the fireplace there. Through the chimney passage, he climbed over to Kengo's room, and in that instant, he became convinced that Kengo was the killer. He began laying out his reasoning. According to Hajime, Kengo had first killed Bando, locked the fireplace room in the west tower, and then returned to his own room through the chimney. After that, he used the chimney again to reach Toma's room, while everyone's attention was focused outside Kengo's locked door. He slipped through the chimney once more into Bando's room, killed him, and then hung Bando's wax figure inside the room. Once everything was done, Kengo returned the same way he came, pretended to take the sleeping drug, and waited until everyone broke the door down. The theory sounded solid, but Kengo simply smiled and told Hajime to check his head. His hair was covered in spider webs. That meant no one had used the chimney passage at all. Right when Hajime was feeling embarrassed, he noticed a photograph tucked inside Kengo's notebook. It showed the 3 victims. Kengo explained that those 3 men were suspects in a case from 30 years ago. The case had been closed due to lack of evidence. He had joined the Mystery Night competition in order to investigate them personally. At that moment, Miyuki suddenly ran in and shouted that the wax figures in the fireplace room were crying. Everyone rushed back immediately. When Hajime stepped inside, he realized the wax figures were actually melting due to extreme heat. But one detail stood out. Bando's wax figure showed no signs of melting at all. While he was thinking, Kengo noticed white particles on one of the stools and went to inspect them. They were salt crystals. Kengo's observation triggered something in Hajime's mind. He immediately rushed to the fireplace and began searching through it. Soon, he discovered a crucial piece of evidence. That night, a shadow quietly opened the fireplace room door. Just as it reached toward the fireplace, Hajime's voice suddenly rang out. Everyone else rushed inside as well. Once everyone had gathered, Hajime began his deduction. From the very first case, the killer had been planting a single idea. When a wax figure dies, the corresponding person dies as well. So when Richard's wax figure appeared, everyone immediately ran to his room, and that moment of panic gave the killer the perfect chance to escape. In truth, the fireplace room was never a locked room mystery, because the killer had been hiding inside all along. The figure that looked like Richard's wax statue was actually the killer in disguise. After everyone left, the killer burned the disguise and clothing in the fireplace, then put the real wax figure back in place. That explained why the wooden stake in the wax figure had a flat tip. The plan was nearly flawless, but in destroying the evidence, the killer accidentally left something behind. Hajime raised a candle, illuminating the figure beside the fireplace, and in that moment, everyone saw the truth. The real killer was Kahoru. Panicked, Kahoru tried to deny it, insisting she had an alibi, but Hajime immediately exposed her. Before they went to check on Kengo, Bando's wax figure had already been moved. The Bando figure they saw earlier was actually Kahoru in disguise. After killing Bando, she returned to the fireplace room, and then disguised herself as Bando's wax statue. Once everyone left believing Kengo was the next target, Kahoru quickly removed her disguise and threw it into the fireplace. But she made one fatal mistake. Her ring fell into the fire. The melted wax figures and the salt on the stool became the decisive evidence. The intense heat had melted every wax figure in the room, except Bando's, because that one had already been moved away. and the bando they saw there was actually Kahoru in disguise. Under the heat, she sweat heavily. And once the moisture evaporated, salt crystals were left behind on the stool. If those salt particles were tested, the truth would be undeniable. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Kahoru finally confessed. She and the 3 victims had all been involved in a robbery 30 years ago. The reason she killed them was because they had betrayed her. Back then, she, her boyfriend, and the others planned a perfect heist. Disguised as police officers, they hijacked an armored truck and stole 400 million yen. But after the success, the others turned on her. Eager to split the money, they attacked her and her boyfriend with blunt weapons, knocking them unconscious. She survived, but her boyfriend died without medical treatment. From that day forward, she swore she would make those 3 pay. As Kahoru grew more and more emotional, she shot and shattered a pre-installed gasoline barrel. Hajime dodged, but his candle fell to the ground. Flames instantly spread across the room. In the end, Kahoru was consumed by the fire, bringing her life of crime to a tragic end. Everyone eventually escaped through a hidden passage guided by Maria. When Hajime woke up, they were all in the hospital. Only Maria was missing. No one could explain who she really was, and thus, the story came to an end.